What's up, fellow nerds? Phreak here. Patch 9.17 has arrived, and this patch, in and of itself, I think means almost nothing. Patch 9.19, if I remember correctly, is the Worlds patch. I believe that's accurate. Regardless, 9.17 isn't it. It's the end of August, and Worlds is in October. So we have roughly 2 more patches until Worlds arrives. Now, what I want to say as further preamble before we get into this is essentially 9.17 and 9.18 are going to be the last patches that Riot can react to. Essentially, NA playoffs are done. Everyone else's playoffs remains on 9.16. That's a lot of competitive data that Riot can react to, and throughout 9.17 and 9.18 react to the pro metagame. And then basically 9.19 is where they can say, well, we did changes in 17, we did changes in 18. What happened to solo queue? Did we overbuff something? Okay, let's pull back. Well, let's be careful. And so essentially 17, 18, and 19 are all going to be very much pro-focused. And then like 20, 21, and 22 roughly will all be solo queue focused. 23-ish, maybe 22 is preseason. There'll be like a 24 or a 23B that like tries to rebalance the game after seeing preseason hit, and then we hit 2020. So that's kind of like the lay of the land for the next few patches, in case you were curious. 9.17 is kind of the first stab at spicing up Pro after reacting a little bit to 9.16, and there'll be a couple more follow-ups before Worlds. So let's get into it. 9.17 exists, and one of the first things coming in is let's call it a remaster. That's actually the term that's being used internally, so I'm stealing that. It's not a rework. Using the same abilities, same art, they do roughly the same things, but it's a remaster. It's changing all the abilities to reshape the champion in a decent way. And so the Aurelion Sol Remaster has shown up, and let's talk about it. Okay, so the passive damage is down slightly, and the AP ratio doesn't scale with level. It's better early game, but it's not turned off by getting crowd controlled. I'm not sure how much this line I'm highlighting matters. It definitely does matter. It's hard to quantify. I am not much of a Aurelion Sol player. But here is the damage on Aurelion Sol's passive, assuming you're maxing W first, because of course you are. Here is the damage output. It is 16 to 6% less, and the AP ratio is this much worse. Well, better and then worse. Level 9 is the guaranteed worsening point. It also means Aurelion Sol is even worse in the late game, with this 0.35 ratio becoming 0.25. Now, you don't always hit 18, but every mid laner gets to at least level 11, right? So, my jaw feels weird. Definitely some level of nerf to the damage. That's just a fact. Does less damage. Okay, but what's the compensation? Well, Q's cooldown is much shorter, and you get more move speed while chasing it down, and it speeds up to catch up with him. So, huge usability buffs to Star Surge. Here is that cooldown before and after. Of course, a flat 10 becomes better over time. Beautiful stuff. Cool. Wow, 30% off the cooldown at level 13, or 14. In this case, it'll be 13. That's pretty cool, right? So from level 10 onwards, strictly more CC. Keep in mind there were buffs to Star Surge a few patches ago that made the point-blank Qs a lot better. So this is a really big deal for his self-peel. It gives him more chances to kind of go in and start trades. Seems pretty effective overall. Seems pretty useful. This should be pretty meaningful. And then here is the real reason for the remaster is a big W change. So now W, instead of being a toggle, always lasts 3 seconds. It increases the rotation speed pretty heavily. When it turns off, he gains movement speed. The cooldown gets reshuffled. The mana cost gets reshuffled. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so here is the cost before and after, by the way. As long as you wanted to use W for only 3 seconds, 3 seconds of W before versus your full 3 seconds of W after is a cost buff. It costs less mana to use W for 3 seconds to do things. Now, the cooldown is, of course, longer in the early game, but it doesn't take too long to get faster, right? Level 7 is not that hard to get to. Now, it's certainly a nerf to the first 3 levels where he would turn on W and knock down the entire minion wave and get a guaranteed push and do Aurelion Sol things in the early game. That is kind of gone. Right, the early damage is down by a lot. The cooldown is longer. It only lasts for 3 seconds. There is certainly a very big early game wave clear hit. That is absolutely the case. Instead of toggling W, and even there's a late game wave clear hit too, right? Instead of toggling W and just like destroying the whole wave and then figuring it out from there, this very much reshapes the champion into I press a button and it boop, 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 boop. And then 2 seconds later, boop, 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 right? Like you're doing that kind of stuff. Cool sound effects, I know. But that's a really big change. I don't know what it's going to turn into. It's hard for me to say. I have no idea. I'm not even sure. I've been watching PvE. I don't even know how fast these W stars are when they rotate at a high but decaying speed. I don't actually know, but probably going to be meaningful. So this is hard to quantify. I quantified what I could, but that's interesting. Next up is the Comet of Legend change. No longer gains bonus move speed when running around. Instead, it's a much better active with more range, more speed, but a worse cooldown. Now, one thing I did do here is I did understand that Aurelion Sol players put a second point in E early on. I assume it's going to be at level 8. Maybe it's earlier. I don't know. But because essentially the difference between rank 1 and rank 2 of E was so huge that you would put a second point in E before maxing Star Surge. I took that under advisement, and I put the second point of E at level 8 and compared before and after, because you're not going to do that anymore. You're going to sit with your 1-point wonder on E and instead of max Q a little bit sooner. So you have 1 extra skill point from level 8s onwards. So damage is slightly higher as well. Here's the range before and after. Substantially better, even after going from 3 to 4,000 range. Still larger range. So really big power up there. Now the cooldown is longer, but keep in mind that the vast majority of the game is levels 1 through 13, and so for most of the game you have an 80 to 40% longer range with only about a 30 to 40% longer cooldown. So definitely I would say this is overall a buff. In my opinion, it's overall a buff. And then the one other thing going on is at your higher points of the ability, you actually fly faster. I don't think that you rank this second. I think you still max Q second, but hey, some extra stuff right here. Aurelion Sol has I would say, better E. Now, certainly a very long cooldown. 80 to 60 is quite big, but usability, I would say, is way up. So I would say this is overall a buff, this is overall a buff, this is overall a nerf, and this is really hard to say. It's really hard to say. I don't know. My understanding is Aurelion Sol is still high win rate. That could be wrong. You can look it up yourself on pretty much any stats website. Regardless, however this hits, there will be buffs or nerfs next patch. There's maybe even a micro patch that will come out on Friday if it's really off target. So either way, it's going to be a reshape of the champion, and we'll see what it looks like in the future. Minor buffs to Gallio. I'm not going to do the math here. It's too little to matter, but 2 seconds off the rank 1 of the Q, and a pretty big bump in the damage of Shield of Durand. Here's the Q cooldown. Of course, it equals out by level 9, but his early laning phase is going to care. And the W damage is up pretty substantially overall. It's now in real ability damage territory now, finally, which is a good thing. One thing I saw looking through data on Gallio is W maxed first. W max first support Gallio is almost 50% win rate. W max into E max is actually a high win rate build. And these buffs, all of them, directly support that skill order. Rank 1 of Q is better than before, whereas rank 5 is the same. W max is way more valuable. It's 90 extra damage. It's really, really, really substantial. I think as far as solo Q is concerned, support Gallio is back. I don't know if pros are going to play it, but W max support Gallio is completely viable. That is what I'm going to say. Also means you might max W second in mid lane. The most common Gallio build was still maxing W last. That might change now. But these are not trivial buffs. This definitely matters quite a lot. And again, 90 damage if you can max your W, max charge it. Even if you can't, it's still 30, which isn't amazing, but at least exists. In the real world, it's somewhere between 30 and 90 bonus damage, which is enough to really consider. This is pretty substantial. This is several percentages of win rate. Again, I think support Gallio is in the best spot. I think mid Gallio will still end up being somewhat weak, but with a new ability order, maybe that changes things a little bit. I think WMAX second or first should definitely be the thing. So we'll see how that goes. Next up, Kalista gets 2 attack damage, 18 mana, and 10 mana growth. Here you go. It's 3 to 1% more attack damage, and honestly, a pretty meaningful mana plus. I'm a little sad this wasn't 235 instead of 250. just because then we'd sit at a clean 1000 at highest level. But I'm seeing a very increasing trend of a lot of champions getting buffed to have about 1000 mana at level 18, which I think is a great thing. I'm glad we're seeing champions reach about 1000 mana at 18. I think we're going to see like Muramana Kalista ever. I don't think it's going to be likely. There shouldn't be a reason to do it. There shouldn't be a reason to do it. But I don't know. It's still nice. Like, I think it's just good for the readability of the game. Just bounce champion around having 1000 mana for the cost. Whatever. So, okay. Minor buffs, though. Kalista definitely pretty low win rate. I will say that you should be maxing Q first on Kalista, not E first. Q into E max is the better build by several percentage points of win rate. Please change your habits. I think that is I think that's actually part of why Kalista is seen as underpowered, is because her win rate's depressed by bad skill orders. So, max Q. Next up, a Kale remaster. And woo! There is too much going on here for me to keep it all in my brain at the same time, so I'm going to skip over some of it. Essentially, she is ranged at level 6 instead of level 11. Her bonus move speed when you have full stacked passive now works in all durations, but is half the speed bonus. You can actually stack against turrets. You no longer gain even more extra attack speed on certain level ups. You no longer get true damage. Okay, let's stop there. Here's Kale's ranges before and after. First 5 levels, unchanged. Level 6 through level 10, wow. Massive range difference. 11 through 15, 25 less, 16 plus, more range again. This is very obviously a buff. The 25 range is fairly trivial. Obviously, it's fairly trivial here as well. The big deal is you're ranged at level 6. That is really early. That is a very big deal. This matters a lot. This matters a lot. Okay? That's a big deal. Keep this in mind. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that the 6% attack speed per stack no longer goes up to 10% attack speed per stack, which is a loss of 20% attack speed at max stacks. That matters. That is a DPS loss. Kale's DPS is down, and it goes down again with the waves not dealing true damage. Kale's DPS is down. Her range is generally up. Her mobility is generally up. Now she can kite backwards. Overall, this is a buff. Overall, this is a buff. Next up, a remaster on the Q. Refunds mana cost if you hit champion, so she can poke with the ability. It casts faster. The cast time is better. It goes slower. It has less range, but it's more usable. And keep in mind that, like, these are essentially compensation nerfs for this being better, right? Like, the spell comes out faster. It can be slower and still be better. I want to point out something, for example. Oriana Q feels instant, doesn't it? Doesn't it feel impossible to dodge Oriana Q, that she always tags you with it? You know why that is? Because it's an instant cast. It's actually incredibly slow. Oriana Q is very, very slow, but because it's instantaneous, it's really easy to hit. Lowering the cast delay by half, I think generally makes up for this pretty reliably. Okay, yeah, the range is down, but again, if your opponent's running away, a quarter second is 50 range of like move speed, right? So it's actually more than 50 range. So generally speaking, this is a buff. This is a buff, but it shreds less. It shreds less. There's a bug fix, okay? This is generally a buff. So her passive is generally buffed. DPS down, but generally better. Her Q, generally better. What about the E change? Okay, well, the E change no longer... the on-hit ratio is no longer a total attack damage ratio. It's a bonus attack damage ratio. And the percent missing health magic damage is lower by 0 to 4%, but the AP ratio is doubled. What does that mean? Well, here's this. The passive on-hit damage, now keep in mind, most players maxed E second, and it has a total AD ratio, which means if you auto-attack, you deal your base damage, the ability's base damage, and the ability's AD and AP ratios. Because it lost the 0.1 total AD ratio, it loses 5 to 9 damage based on Kale's attack damage, which is 50 to 94. So here you go. It's about an 8% damage drop. But because the AP ratio went up from 0.2 to 0.25, it only takes between 1 and 200 ability power to buff E's on-hit damage. Now, 100 is not doable at level 1, but 185 is very easy by level 18, which means essentially Rageblade Gnasher's Tooth plus runes gets you there. So AP Kale got buffed, AD Kale got slightly weaker. What about the active damage? Again, 0 to 4% less missing health damage, but double the AP ratio. Well, it takes 1 to 400 AP to buff that. Okay, well, this part at the end here, this 400 is a bit harder to do, don't get me wrong. But keep in mind the active damage is the same in the first 7 levels. So, that's fine. And then, yeah, it goes down by a fair bit. It goes down by up to 25%, and needs 400 ability power to get you back there. Now, if you were to max E last, you will almost never feel this nerf. But if you max E second, you will. And to be fair, these changes make you want to max E last a bit more because the rank up isn't quite as good. People were already split between maxing E like first and second. Some people did it third, but you're probably not going to max it first anymore, and that's fine. You can go max Q. It'll be reasonable. And then, hey, the mana cost on R is nice, and the radius goes up, whatever. These are very minor things you don't have to math out. It's very easy to see on paper what they do. But yeah, the E change, I would say, is just on paper a nerf. AP Kale can see a buff or maybe a return to form somewhere in between this year. You're not going to see 500 ability power Kale builds, but you are going to see shifts toward AP Kale, right? Changes shift you toward AP Kale. The biggest thing, though, is his passive change. Your range is up substantially in most parts of the game. This is a really big deal. This matters a whole lot. New Kale is going to look really interesting because he's getting ranged at level 6, and then most of the rest of these things are just kind of touch-ups. I think this is generally a cleaned up kit. I think this is positive. I want to point out, by the way, that keep in mind that when you're exalted, instead of getting 50% towards enemies, 8% all directions. That's what happens at 16. When you're transcendent, you get your guaranteed max stacks, which you get your 8% move speed all of the time at level 16. Like, there's a lot of things that go in there. So overall, feels like a buff. Feels like Kale is stronger. And I like these changes. Next up is Leona, getting 1 second off the Q cooldown. Great. Lucian gets 3 attack damage. Here's that data table. It's 5 to 3% more attack damage, so slightly better lane bully. Nico can disguise as herself, aka drop disguise. Pantheon can now tap Q for the missing health damage, and the E now deals full damage against all monsters. So jungle Pantheon got stronger. And tap Q does things, which is nice. Next up, Kiana nerfs. 10 flat damage off the E, and 0, 20, 40 seconds up on the R cooldown. Here's your damage. Keep in mind this should be a red column. I'm just a dum-dum. Here we can fix that. Marvelous. This is why I use sheets instead of screenshots. Isn't that more satisfying? Of course it is. But yeah, so the R cooldown, it's clearly buffed 1 through 5, Kappa. Yeah, I mean, these are pretty meaningful. 80 is obviously a very, very short cooldown. It's very easy for Kiana to build CDR anyway. Keep in mind she would always go double lethality. So she's always sitting on 20 CDR in every game state by end game. So you're not going to get in states really very often where you're going to miss out on your ults in sort of a team fight sort of scenario, because you're still dropping 24 seconds off this, and it's still going to be 96 in the real game instead of, 56? 64 in the real game it was before. So, I mean, like, it does matter. It's still 50% longer, don't get me wrong, but you weren't really getting 2 ults per team fight anyway, and it was still going to be up every team fight kind of regardless, so this isn't that big of a deal. It means more for solo queue than pro, I would say. 10 damage off E is 10 damage. Cool, good stuff. Definitely a bit strong. My understanding is she's basically 100% pick ban in the LPL right now. Only some NA teams play Kiana, but definitely a strong champion, worthy of nerfs, so minor nerfs. Rise gets 4 magic resist, which means very little. It's 3% magic durability. Here you go. 30 to 39 becomes 34 to 43. This makes Rise more of a mid laner because you tend to see magic damage in the mid lane. You tend not to see as much magic damage in the top lane. So they're trying to bring Rise up, right? Base stat buffs tend to be solo queue happy as well, so it's going to be a bigger win rate buff in solo queue than it will in pro play, but Okay, that's cool. Here you go, Rise. Enjoy. Have fun. Next up is Zyra, who's getting... randomly, her R had a scaling mana cost. I have no idea why. I apparently missed that as well. I didn't know that existed. Not actually play quite a bit of Zyra. Okay, some mana cost off the ult, some cooldown off the ult. Here you go. So casuals, I mean, this mana cost barely matters. It's good for consistency's sake. Like, I am glad more and more they're making the ults cost 100 mana. That's a good thing. That's a positive. Hooray. Keep doing it. Love it. Way to go. And the cooldown actually down pretty meaningfully. And this is actually quite meaningful. Keep in mind that support Zyra really only ever gets 10 CDR. You don't tend to go Transcendence. You don't tend to go the scaling CDR rune because you're an under-leveled champion, assuming you're playing support. Yeah, I know I talked a little bit ago about how Kiana was always going to have the ulti up. Part of that is because she's always got 20 CDR. Zyra really only ever gets 10 CDR in any reasonable game. You don't reach 20. Like, you're not buying another Fiendish Codex at any point in League of Legends. Just like 90% of the time it's not happening. So she feels this more because you are going to be in this. I think like if you play bot lane, you're in a lot more really scrappy fights. Being a support, you tend to roam. You're in more scrappy fights. I think ult cooldowns mean a lot more for supports than they do other roles because you can't buy CDR. You can't get CDR runes very easily because they tend to be biased away from support, which feels bad, but oh well. I could see that changed, honestly, but it hasn't. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this matters, right? It's a big damage tool. It's a big CC tool. This is definitely a couple percentage of win rate up for Zyra. And so this kind of rounds out the buffs to champions in pro play. So let's do a quick TLDR. Patch 9.17 TLDR. There's going to be 2 more patches till we hit Worlds, and it's a bunch of pro-focused changes. Aurelion Sol gets a remaster where his passive/W damage is down slightly. His Q cooldown is better. W is now an active that ultimately costs less mana. It's burstier, but you can't leave it toggled up. And E has more range. Probably going to be power up for Aurelion Sol. There's also probably going to be a follow-up patch. Sol's winner will probably drop day 1 because of the usability difficulty. People will get better at it over time, and it will climb over the patch. Gallio, I think, is best served as W max first, E max second support Gallio. I think it's viable. This is a very, very big damage upgrade, and leaving Q at 1 point is going to be just fine with the buff like this. Support Gallio should be good. Kalista, minor stat buffs will raise her a 1 or 2% win rate. Maybe less, probably about 1%. Okay, whatever. But if you're smart, you max Q first, and Kalista's going to be in a good spot. Kale gets a major update here. It's another remaster. She is ranged at level 6. She is ranged at level 6, and that is a really, really big deal. Her overall damage is slightly lower by getting less attack speed and not getting true damage, but she gets more range at 16, more range at level 6. Q is an overall better ability, higher usability. E's damage is down slightly, but scales better with ability power. It takes between 1 and 400 AP, based on which part and which rank you care about, to strictly buff the ability. Otherwise, it's weaker in most cases, and R is a little bit nicer as well. These probably end up being Kale buffs, with E being weaker, Q being stronger, and the passive being stronger, and the ult being stronger. Leona gets a minor cooldown update on Q. Lucian gets 1.5% win rate of base damage. Nico can undisguise. Pantheon is a better jungler. He now deals full damage with E to jungle monsters, and his spear now does full damage on tap, or does execute damage on tap. 10 damage off Kiana's E, 0-20, 40 seconds on Kiana's ultimate are minor nerfs here. Ryze gets 3% more durability against magic damage. Zyra gets a pretty substantial mana cost. Well, okay, that's nice, I guess, buff to the mana cost, and a pretty substantial cooldown buff to the R. I think all these are really cool changes. I don't think that they bring all these champs into pro, but I like all of them. I think it's a cool patch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.